Dear listeners and viewers, now I am going to justify the title of the play by Tennessee Williams, A Streetcar Named Desire. Williams has called the streetcar the ideal metaphor for human condition. The play's title refers not only to a real streetcar like in New Orleans, but symbolically to the power of desire as the driving force behind the character's actions. Blanche's journey on desire through symmetries. Here, symmetries means graveyard to Elysian fields is both literal and allegorical. Elysian fields metamorphically is the land of death in Greek mythology. Desire is explained by Tennessee literally and allegorically. Desire is a controlling force. When it takes over, characters must submit to the power and they are carried to the end of their lives. Blanche uses it 2 times in the play. She says, "They told me to take a streetcar named Desire and transfer to one called Symmetries and ride 6 blocks and get off Elysian fields." She is making this statement to Eunice, scene 1. Second time, when Blanche says to Stella, "What you are talking about is brutal desire, just desire." The name of that rattle trap, a streetcar that bangs through the quarter up one told narrow street and down another. Stella says, "Have not you ever ridden on that streetcar?" Blanche says, "It brought me here." The dialogues take us to the metamorphical and allegorical meanings of the play's title. Blanche is literally brought to New Orleans by desire, but she is also brought at Kowalski's place by her own desire for a better life, as she has ruined her reputation due to her sexual encounters with strangers at Laurel and was driven out of the town. However, she forgets that past never leaves behind. It always dogs after. In the play, sex desire is seen as destructive force. In fact, if we go back to Blanche's first reference to the streetcar that we opened this discussion with, desire then cemeteries, then Elysian fields, that is afterlife, which hint at sex, death, and the afterlife. It is like a linear progression. Sex leads to death, hence, sex takes to destruction, as we see from the statement of Blanche. Blanche narrates herself that her ancestors committed certain faults, and due to their fault, she lost her ancestral house, Bellerive, and she had no place to live in. Then she shifted to a hotel, Flamingo, in Laurel. Her own reputation comes to an end due to her sexual encounters with strangers while living in the hotel. She lost her job due to her own sexual relation with a boy of that high school in Laurel, and was expelled by the boss, Mr. Graves. Her married life had already come to an end, as her husband was found to be a homosexual and she scolded him. He committed suicide out of shame. And the big blow that makes her insane, or what is left of her, is the sexual act done to her by Stanley, who forcefully rapes her. This act of Stanley serves as the biggest loss for Blanche. She becomes almost insane. She was in fact trapped. It is ironic that Blanche did not understand this reality and established sexual relations with strangers to console her heart, and created a world of her own imagination to derive pleasure. She could not conform to the changed situations in South American aristocratic society. And the following line will clearly explain the desire how desire plays eminent role in destruction to bring about death. Desire plays an important role in the streetcar, which is death, Death was also close as you are. The opposite is desire. Williams has mentioned in the play. Blanche is somehow under the impression that sex is her escape from death. Here, death means reality. She turned to sex to comfort her after her husband's death and after her relatives passed away one by one. Unfortunately, as we already know, desire leads to cemeteries, which finally leads to Elysian fields. Blanche has actually got into a vicious circle. Something dies, she knows better. So she wants to escape from death and she turns to sex, which causes something else to die. And finally, she dies herself when she is sent to mental asylum. Her final famous line, "I have already depended on the kindness of strangers," is yet another example of tragic irony. What Blanche considers kindness, it is only desire. The attention she gets from strangers is generally sexual in nature. She got this kindness in terms of sexual terms. Thus, Blanche finally leads herself to destruction due to her own desire. She could not control herself. This destructive force called desire. A streetcar named Desire is apt. The title is apt and appropriate. That's why Tennessee changed the original title Poker's Game. You should know, listeners, that the original title of the play was Poker's Game. There are many symbols and allusions that point to the readers and the audiences towards the true nature of characters. One of these is the title itself. Not only it is unusual, it is what eventually drives Blanche to destruction. In the opening scene, Blanche takes a streetcar named Desire, then transfers to one called Cemeteries, and finally gets off at Elysian Fields. Right from the beginning, Desire is looked to Cemeteries and then to Elysian Fields. In other words, death and Elysian Fields refer to paradise, where Blanche hopes to end up. There is also the name of the street, Elysian Fields, where Estella dwells in. Desire is in fact the driving force in the play. Blanche's own desire for money, position, sex, love, youth, attention, and many more, is precisely mentioned, which drags her to the bottom of misery. Blanche does not realize that it was sex and desire itself that leads her to ruin. Blanche leaves her sister's place as abruptly as she had come. She is escorted to an insane asylum. Since her stories of Stanley raping her is not taken seriously and believed by her own sister, who says that her narration is simply hysterical and fabulated. Her last statement rings certain truth, since she can no longer now counts on friends and even on her own sister, Stella. Her whims and unrestrained sexuality. Here, sexuality means desires, have led to her own ruin. Blanche does not realize that it was sex and desire itself that led to all of those deaths, and in the end ends up. And she was caught in the trap. One of the main factors that led to Blanche's mental neurosis is the suicide of her husband, racked by guilt. She firmly believes that she drove her husband to become a homosexual, to become a gay, and eventually who killed himself out of shame. So in order to prove herself, her femininity and sexuality, she had many intimacies with strangers. As Blanche is lost without anyone who are there to hold into her desires, drive her from man to man, haunting for some protection or to stay one might shelter. Blanche says, intimacies with strangers was all I seemed able to fill my empty heart. Desire is thus main thread that runs throughout the play. The streetcar named Desire is actually a cry of pain, as Arthur Miller rightly says, and forgetting that is to forget the story. To conclude, Blanche could not adapt herself according to the changed situation of her misfortune. She began to live in the world of imagination and escaped to face reality. Her last line indicates her total detachment from reality and her decisions to see life as she wishes to perceive. Escape from reality finally leads her to ruin herself. This escapism from reality results a lot of desires into her mind, which finally leads her to Elysian fields. Hence, this shows the appropriateness of the title. Now, listeners, I request you, if you like my narration and depiction, please subscribe and share with your friends. One thing I would like to say here, that whatever I explain, I try to bring before you almost all aspects of any novel or play, keeping in mind the NET examination and the university examination as well, so that you may be able to answer any question which are asked in any examination. Thank you. Thank you. Dear listeners,